Welcome to this Travel Weekly webcast. I'm Ian Taylor and I'm joined today by Johan Lundgren, Chief Executive of easyJet. Welcome, Johan.
Good morning, Ian.
Good to see you. There's a lot to discuss. Let's start with the budget, since it just happened. There wasn't much for aviation, and it was there. Were you disappointed?
Yes, I think that the government missed an obvious opportunity to now set out a specific support, and introduce a measure that would help the industry overall. And we've been calling out, as you know, for reduced or removal temporarily for the APD, which I would believe would have done many great things. It would have increased the confidence from the operators to put on capacity. It would have increased clearly demand in there as well, and that means that connectivity and in UK would have been far greater if that would have been the case. And they pointed out very early on as part of this pandemic that aviation sector and the travel sector was the hardest hit. I think they even said it was the hardest hit, not just one of the most, all the sectors who had, fared, badly out of this one. And still, we are yet to see a specific support dedicated to the sector. So that was disappointing. Now, also the extension of the furlough is clearly something that was welcome. But I think most importantly, what our focus is all about right now is to make sure that there is a recommendation now coming back from the Global Travel Task Force to the Prime Minister here in April that will allow international travel to take place from the 17th of May. But overall, I think it was a missed opportunity. I think that they don't recognize the industry for the value that is creating and the damage that has been taking place. And I thought that APD would have been a good measure to address that upon.
Yeah, we still promised an aviation recovery plan, which we're given to understand will be at least mentioned after April the 12th, after the task force reports. So are you hopeful of there being more in that? Clearly that wouldn't look at APD.
Well, look, I think it's we need to move from the words into actions. There are tremendous damage that already been taking place. The damage is done. It's not like it's something that's going to happen. If you're looking at the travel agencies and tour operators and airlines alike and airports, in order to survive this, all companies has needed to take on huge amounts of debt as an example. So I think that the support, it is ultimately important that it gets to the people who needs it and the companies who needs that. So I think that would have been something that should have been done earlier, but it doesn't change the fact that we will continue to argue and discuss and engage with them on this topic. And we do understand that they have a very difficult job. I do understand that there are very many competing priorities in there, but what I do not understand is that it has been rightly so identified as the worst hit sector. And I just fail to see why there's been support given out to other sectors, and some sectors have been achieving great results throughout this pandemic, and they've still been able to access some of the support that has been generally given out as well. So I think it's a mismatch there, but clearly we're looking forward to any support we can get, and we'll continue to argue and engage with them on that.
Okay. If we come to the Prime Minister's roadmap from almost a fortnight ago now, in advance of that, you asked for a clear statement from the Prime Minister, and I think we all got more than we were expecting, really, in terms of travel, didn't we? Were you fairly pleased with that?
Yes, I was. I think that the fact that the Prime Minister came out and said it is our intentions and it is our objectives that we want to restart international travel in a safe way, and then was also then giving out the dates, the April date and the May date as an example, that they were aiming for. And look, we all understand that things might change and things could take a turn for some reason for the worse that we couldn't see right now. But I think that the intention and the objective, and also the assignment then to the Travel Task Force to come up with recommendations that would allow international travel to take place, I think that was very good, and I'm very pleased with that. And we have engaged very much with them to make sure that they do justice. And I think I agree with you. I'm very pleased with what they came up with on that.
Okay. And did you see an immediate impact on bookings after the Prime Minister's
Yeah.
announcement?
Yes, I mean it was remarkable. I mean it's interesting, Ian. We've seen that throughout the whole year that you know the travel sentiment is so reliant on the daily news flow. When a minister says something that is, you know, don't book your holiday yet type of thing, you know, that has an immediate impact on the bookings. And if they're less clear, they're more optimistic, we see it immediately. And, you know, we had a 630% surge in easyJet holidays, you know, on that afternoon, that evening. We had a, you know, 337% increase in bookings on flights, as an example. And it also, you know, continued quite well into the following days. And people are, you know, you don't need to do a lot of studies and surveys now. You can just look at yourself and your friends and family. People are just, you know, can't wait to get out of lockdown and get back to traveling again and come back into some type of normality. So yes, it's very much depending on what the statements are from the government.
Okay. So we've got this May 17th potential restart. Are you hopeful of it being that, or realistically do you expect it to be later? For example, Robert Courts, the aviation minister, appeared before the Transport Select Committee this week and said it will be as soon as possible after May the 17th. I'm hearing from people in the aviation sector they expect June to be realistically. What do you expect?
Well, you know, they said the intention is May 17. And you know we are engaging with them, you know, on a weekly basis, almost in some way or shape and format. And of course, we want to work to make sure that the task force recommendation is of such kind and is shaped in that way that, you know, travel can take place from May 17th. And I think that is the intention that the Prime Minister said, and that's what we're all going to need to work for. Now, if that is delayed some weeks, I don't think, you know, that's perhaps not a big deal. But the intention is to try to stick with the dates that we have available. And look, by May 17th, if you're looking at the, you know, the projection, I think now of where vaccination program will be in the UK and then also in other jurisdictions in other countries, I think there may well be an opportunity that you could fly internationally from May 17th and onwards. But look, it's speculation. Nobody knows this yet. The Prime Minister has stated the intention and the objective, and that's a good thing. And now it's down to the Travel Task Force and many others to make informed decision that we can unwind the measures that are in place and start traveling in a safe way.
Okay, some in the industry have been critical of the task force process. Why aren't there industry people sitting on the task force? Why doesn't it consult more widely, etc., etc.? You all understandable in the circumstances, but are you confident in the task force process?
Well, look, I think, you know, there needs to be a format for it, you know, and I think it's almost impossible that you're going to satisfy everyone's needs and thoughts and opinions on how one should go about that. Ultimately, it comes back to the determination and the success of that is what comes out of it. You know, that's where we can judge whether that has been working or not working. But I think it's a genuine attempt, and it's genuine efforts that goes into this to make sure that there are recommendations that the Prime Minister can approve upon in April when it's done. So I think it's absolutely the right intention to do, and you know, in terms of how that is constituted, I think it is fair enough. And you know, I think that they're going to take all the advices they can from the industry, and then trying to make some informed decision based on also on the medical expertise that they have available.
Yeah, and the timetable they've laid out that the task force will report on April the 12th, and the Prime Minister will consider it, and so there'll then be this 5 weeks up to May the 17th. That's all sufficient time for you to organise operations and so on, and be ready to go from May the 17th if you hear pretty soon after April the 12th, is it?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have consciously made sure that the fleet is in what we call a flight-ready condition, and we're also keeping our crew updated on training. So with relatively short notice, we can scale up the operation to meet the demand that will absolutely be there. There's no doubt that there, you know, for every day that goes, that this pent-up demand increases, and escalate. So that's what we've been doing. Now, clearly, if we can get a clear set of recommendations that is approved here on the 12th, that would be sufficient time for us to make sure that we have a very meaningful program here for the summer.
Okay, it's not likely to be a summer free of travel restrictions, though, is it, Johan? What do you envisage?
No, I think you're right. I think we're gonna, be conscious of the fact that there will be, restrictions taking place, depending on the destination. But also remember now that there's huge, knowledge now that exists that wasn't there if you go back into last summer. The data that exists on prevalence and on the rate of the virus as it spreads and how it comes down, the rate of the infection, the vaccination program being rolled out, the different strains and the mutations as well. Travel corridors. You have the countries on the red list, on the amber list, on the green list, and you have testing. We have the discussion about the certification for vaccination as an example. So the whole set of tools now and knowledge that is available. So one of the things that we are urging and encouraging the government to do is, of course, to use whatever tools and means that are available to make sure that we can unwind these measures in a safe way. Because here's the thing that is important. The important is to understand that what we want to achieve is actually international travel to take place in a safe way without any restrictions. One of my concerns is, of course, that restrictions are being introduced in a way where it's not supported by data, and because of the characteristics of that means that it's also very unclear on when and how they're going to be removed. So the danger is, of course, that inefficient measures that makes it more costly and more inconvenient for customers to fly and to travel are being just left there, and that's not what we can accept. So one of the things that I brought forward to the government is to make sure that we got to remember that the ultimate goal here is to be able to fly safely without any restrictions whatsoever. Now, how to get there is, of course, where the debate needs to be, and what measures are being introduced on what basis is absolutely necessary to understand, because otherwise, how can you remove them in a safe way? So those would be the type of things that I would be, watching very carefully and engage with the government clearly to try to have a debate about on how that will work. And I'm sure there's going to be a mix of these things. And myself and we've been, skeptical about the idea of a passport on vaccination as an example. But if there is a certificate or a proof one way or the other that is needed to get travel going again, and that can be done in a safe way, and it's also within the regulation that exists around GDPR and privacy, of course we would be supportive of that. So whatever it takes to safely get travel going again, we will support.
Okay, presumably we'll get to a place where there's safe travel without restrictions down the road a little bit, but there's going to be this period of a phased relaxation. So for this summer, would you expect a combination of the things you've mentioned, a return of travel corridors, some element of testing for some destinations, vaccination certificate where people have them, and so on, and presumably the retention of red list destinations where there are the variants and so on, which could mean the retention of quarantine and even quarantine hotels? Is that what you would expect, those different layers?
It's so easy to answer yes on that, because you could argue there are many proof points and evidence that points toward that. But remember here, it's all about the virus in itself, the spread of it, the pressure on the health systems across Europe, the possible different mutations, the vaccine's efficiency on those mutations and the variants. That is at the core. That's the thing that really is the thing to watch here. And then you need to work out that for every data point that you see, that means that you need to put a measure in place to control one part of what's happening in there. That's what needs to be introduced into certain jurisdictions at that point in time. That needs to be targeted. It needs to be risk-based. And this is what this is what we argued even at the early part of last summer, that it has to be risk-based and it needs to be driven by data that is now available. So I think it all comes back to the development of the virus. Look, if other countries get into the same speed and efficiency about the rollout of the vaccination program as we see now here in the UK, which the government has done a brilliant job at, and it proves that the vaccinations are, as we know by now at least, effective to any type of mutations and strains that we've seen. Well, then you could come in a situation where there should be, very little or no restrictions on travel whatsoever, if the rate's coming down. I think it comes back also very much to the different governments' points of view in regards of if they are adopting a zero COVID approach, or if, as I think the Prime Minister indicated here, that they are looking to the fact that this virus will most likely be around and we will live in it and we will control it and we will manage it. Because if you're having a zero COVID approach towards, I think is much worse, of course, because I think it's doubtful that it's even realistic you can have that if you're a country who wants connectivity and you want travel to take place and you want to live with some type of new normality. But I think that those things are still a little bit up in the air, and the approaches the government will take on this is going to be determining also the measures that's going to be introduced or removed and when they're going to be removed.
Okay. I think the government here has accepted that a zero COVID approach is just impossible. But let me ask you in a different way then, Johan. If quarantine hotels were retained for red list destinations for a period when travel resumes, would you see that as a potential barrier to people developing the confidence to travel, fearing that the categorization of a destination might change while I'm away? And so on. Would you prefer not to see that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have doubts, and I'm not a medical expert, but we got access to medical expertise, and we're following the debate very closely, and it's not entirely clear that the hotel quarantine is an effective way. If you are adopting a non-zero COVID approach. The idea that came from Australia as an example, which means when you're looking at the numbers that they've been reducing their normal arrivals down to, I think it's 1.2%. If you would take the same number in the UK, that means you would still have about 110,000 people arriving in the UK. They all would go into hotels. That's just not feasible. That's just not possible. But I do think it's when you're looking at that red country list and the amber and the green countries, I think you have to accept that if you're placed in a red country, that there needs to be restrictions into place. But I'm not entirely sure that the hotel quarantine is at all the right way of doing it. I can understand the quarantine, but then it would be better measures to have people being at home, and you monitor it from there in a different way. I think we got to also learn from the measures that are being introduced. Are they actually working? Are they efficient? Can you live with them? And at the same time, you need to get the economy going. You need to get people back into living some type of a normal life back again. And it's for me not clear that the hotel quarantine is a good way going forward. But of course, this will have an impact on customers' confidence to some extent. And I think it will be a debate to see about those red list countries where they will be. But it might be also that they would have not hotel quarantine as one of the tools available. There might be other things that the task force will look to see if they were looking at the different steps for the different coded colors of countries and where they would be.
Yeah, sure. Okay, you there's clearly a lot of momentum building behind vaccination certificates, and you noted that the industry was somewhat skeptical of vaccination certificates initially, and would prefer to see testing, rapid testing, and so on. What's the thinking behind that? I mean, clearly, the industry doesn't want them referred to as vaccine passports. because we don't want them to be discriminatory and stop other people flying and so on.
Well, they are discriminatory by nature. That's what they're doing. Either you have the vaccination or you don't have it, and we're gonna make a difference between those two categories of people. Look, I think even the WHO came out this morning or just a couple of days ago, where they had great concerns about this, because they were looking at it from the point of view that it's not entirely clear that what's the efficiency it leads to if you have been vaccinated in terms of you spreading on the virus. So you could potentially end up in a situation where you falsely are proving and say I'm vaccinated, but you're actually still a carrier and spread on the virus. So there's a medical element on that needs to be thought through, and I think it's also there's a lot of privacy issues around that in its place. I mean, we do have people come back and say, oh, we got the proof of the yellow fever as an example, so why should this be something different? Well, because we're talking about millions and millions and millions of people, with the consequences of making this much more complicated, much more costly, possibly intrusion into privacy laws, GDPR issues. I think all those things are being looked into and they can be resolved. But it's yet again another step of complexity, and if there are medical question marks around that, then I think it's highly debatable. The question is whether you have the virus or not. That's the question. That's the key thing. And if you have data available that shows that the R rate and the infection rates are at similar levels from one jurisdiction to another, or even lower, or within reasonable lines of being in the same place, then that should not be an issue unless you get variants and mutations of it, which are also quite identifiable at this moment in time, from what I understand.
Yeah.
So why add in something that is medically questionable, that has some privacy issues around that is discriminatory by the nature of it, and adds complexity. But like I said, if that is what is needed and it's been proved that is the way one can restart travel in a safe way, of course we would be supportive of it. Okay. But you can't just. I'm afraid of the idea, and I hear sometimes people coming up with all sorts of ideas, and I see that across the many countries that we are operating in, and it's not coordinated. It's not. It's not like somebody sits and they have the same, even if they get the same advice, they take different positions on that in different countries. And the nightmare is, of course, that you're ending up with, different approaches on this in different countries, and there's no agreement on that, and makes it utterly confusing for customers and highly difficult to operate for us as an airline or any travel company for that matter.
Yeah, that was the other element of the question about vaccination certification I was going to ask you, because it has been extraordinary, the level of uncooperation between countries, even in the EU, throughout the pandemic. And yet we're led to believe there's suddenly going to be agreement on vaccination, international recognition of vaccination certification in time for the summer. I mean, is that realistic, would you say?
I don't know. It might happen. It might not happen. I mean, if it's one thing that we've seen across this pandemic is that there's been very little coordination on the approach from the start here, from EU as an example. I think that as this progressed, I think all countries really was looking into themselves and trying to work out and control the situation within their borders, and therefore there was no time to wait for other bodies and forums to come up with common approaches on that. And some of this is understandable, you can see it happen, but it's definitely been a nationalistic approach on this rather than a collective joined up approach, and that makes it very difficult. Now I do think, though, a reason why you could be slightly more optimistic about this is that there are more data points available, there are more learnings available on this. But like I said, you can still look at the same data and you can still take a different view, and it also depending on the risk approach that the governments have. If you are listening to medical expertise and scientists and you clearly ask them, say, well, what are we going to need to do to not have any COVID? They going to come up with very draconian measures that needs to be in place. But ultimately, it needs to be the politicians who decides on the actions they have, because they need to balance up all the damages that happens to people's mental health, increased alcoholism, domestic abuse, companies that go bust, redundancies. All of that also has a price to pay. So that's why I'm quite skeptical of a kind of a zero COVID approach. I think we need to live with this in a way where we can get back to some type of normality, and the damages out of all these things that I mentioned on the other things is not, escalating and throwing out of proportion to become a bigger problem than a controlled virus might represent.
Yeah, sure. Okay, just one final quick question on vaccination certification. We're starting to see some carriers, the Gulf carriers in particular, promoting the fact that all their frontline crew and staff are vaccinated. Is that helpful? I know that's not something easyJet would do, but is that helpful to the industry as a whole, would you say?
Well, we wouldn't do that. We would, follow and take the view that we will follow the rules and regulations that government sets out on these issues. We would not mandate that ourselves, that, people needs to be vaccinated or they can't go to work. I think that's down to, the regulations and the rules that come out from each and every country on that, and that does not exist at that moment in time. I think it would be a difficult one to argue, to say that, look, I'm going to take a view on the fact that you need to take this vaccine, and and otherwise you can't have it work for us. I struggle with that idea. Yeah. So we wouldn't do it at easyJet, but other companies might want to go down that route. But at this moment in time, that's not something we're considering.
Okay, you've talked about the difficulties of dealing with multiple jurisdictions. I mean, we've got that even within the UK, haven't we, with the differences between the devolved administrations. Are you concerned about the continuing differences, and do you think they'll be resolved in time for a May restart, or is that potentially another issue?
Yeah, it's not great, to say the least. I mean, I was on a long call with Peter Matheson, the Secretary of State and Minister of Transport in Scotland here early in the week, and we talked about this very issue. Now, I think that the positive thing out of that conversation is that he is clearly as much intent to get flying and international travel going again. I mean, Scotland in this case is clearly in need of connectivity, so they want to do that, but they want to do it in a safe way, and that's the same view that we have and that the British government have. But they've been advised, and they've been looking at the same figures as the British government, who came up with a roadmap on dates. They decided not to. And of course, that's a concern, because if it's proven in that way that it will be allowed to fly from England, and people could just take the car and fly, go down to Manchester or any other airport in there as well, and then they can go across, borders that are not controlled, that wouldn't make sense. I don't think that will happen at all. I think they will come up with a joint plan on this. But clearly, I raised the concern about the fact that they didn't take the same view, looking at the same data, that they had dates in place on where they wanted to get to. Because I think it's important to signal the intent and understand that this is our objective, that we want to go, and then we do understand that if things changes, that we might need to retract and adapt to different. But just to say that we can't tell you anything more right now, it's difficult, and it's horrible for the industry. So, but I feel that they definitely have the intention, to try to come up with a roadmap, and I think it will be aligned at the end of the day.
Okay, and do you think it's inevitable that there'll be an element of stop-start again to travel this summer, like last summer when it was extreme? Or do you think it might be possible to at least restrict that, if not eliminate it?
Could be. It comes back to the same point about how the infection is going to behave, and how the different jurisdictions are able to manage and control that. But if it's a stop-start, then at least it should be on a targeted basis, on on a route basis or on a destination basis rather than a full lockdown. I don't think there's nobody who believes that it will be a full lockdown again, but you can see that it can be, regional stop start. I can see that happen, and the way we at easyJet have been looking at this is we've been very clear that we in order to come away with that and give people the confidence, we have also then introduced the most flexible cancellation policies we ever had. We're the only airline where you actually you can book your flight for the summer, and if you can't fly because of the pandemic, because the restrictions are in place, you can cancel it and get your money back, even if the flight operates. So those are the type of things we're trying to do to make people aware that they can book with the confidence of doing that. And of course, that's very unhelpful then when the ministers comes out and say we don't book for the holiday. What they should say is that check with your operator and with your airline what their cancellation policies are. And also, I think for the whole of the industry, has been very well in developing some of the most generous and flexible policies that have always been in place. And because of the deals that is out there right now, you could argue that there's never been a better time to book your vacation for the summer.
Okay, so nuanced Foreign Office advice is going to be important this summer, regionally focused Foreign Office advice.
Absolutely, and you need to see that they are aligned clearly with the restrictions and the measures that are in place, because otherwise it's gonna be not a good situation at all, and that won't be acceptable. So that's another thing that needs to be looked at, to see that the measures that are in place needs to have an alignment also on what the advices are.
Okay, are you hopeful of a joint plan across the EU for a restart?
I think that definitely the sentiment is there that people want to do that. I think that also EU has been more forward-looking and taking a lead in a way that they probably didn't do in the early part of the pandemic or last summer, as an example. So I think that there's more of a willingness to do so, and I think also the ministers in each and every country that I speak to clearly recognize the need here to come up with a joint approach on that. But you got to take that in one hand, and then you also have countries who are tremendously depending on tourism, who probably makes a call to say, look, we can't wait, it takes too long time, and we believe that this is a safe thing to do. So, you know what, I'm going to go out and say that, look, I'm going to need to have a certification of a vaccine, or I'm going to allow that country to come and not come. And so that could well be the place. But I do think that as soon as one or two countries, so the major tourism destinations opens up, I just think it's going to create a tremendous pressure on everyone else to follow suit. And I think that they will then adapt the approaches that has been already introduced into other countries, as long as they're safe to do so. So I'm quite positive on the fact that I do think that if we're getting the roadmaps now and the equivalent of roadmaps that the UK has come out with also in the different countries, and that can accelerate it, then we can actually still have a strong summer.
Okay, you've talked recently in the last 2 or 3 weeks about moving aircraft to where the demand is. It sounds like you don't anticipate having to do a lot of that once things get going, because you think places will open up generally. Is that
right? I mean, we already done that to some extent. I mean, we're flying very small volumes right now. We guided for the quarter of not do more than 10% of 19's flying, but it's one of the good things with an aircraft is you can actually fly it to different places, so you can base it and adapt it to the demand that you see there. I mean, could there be a point where there is a more of a domestic schedule, overrepresented domestic flying as an example? Yes, you could see that, but we would definitely be able to move the assets to wherever we see that the demand was and adapt ourselves to that. So that's already in the plan. We got the flexibility to do so.
Okay, and again, 2 or 3 weeks ago, you said that you were looking at multiple scenarios and waiting to make decisions. Was the point you'll do that presumably as soon after April the 12th as you get clarity on what's proposed?
Yeah, I think it's a very important date. I mean, that's where the recommendation is going to be, and potential measures will they then be presented, and we get another step towards getting a better view and getting better clarity. And the issue is around, you know, having that certainty and the clarity so we can plan for that. And what you want to do then is, of course, to see that you can wait as long as possible before you make final decisions on capacity. But you know, that's why it was so important for us to get this date, and then we have another set of information that we can plan with. Because if we before the Prime Minister announced this roadmap, I mean, there was really nothing. So that's why I think we were pleased about the announcement of the roadmap, and then the 12th of April will be another key date.
Okay. How does the UK compare with your other main markets in Europe, Johan? Because the impression we have here is that it's sort of uniquely awful or something in terms of the travel sector anyway. But if I talk to TUI, more than half their forward bookings are from the UK and so on. So how does it look from easyJet's position?
Well, I think that look, if you take a step back, it's you know. It's not a flattering picture if you're looking from the point of view that UK has had the most death per capita, I believe, out of any large country. It has also suffered some of the most from the economy point of view, if you're looking at the GDP. So that trade-off theory that you could either focus on your economy and therefore, you know, you might live with, you have a bigger health issue, or you focus on the health issue and your economy will suffer, you know, more. That doesn't work. You know, I think that's a big problem here in the UK, that we've had more deaths and the economic damage has been greater. Now, moving that aside, I think that there's no doubt that the rollout of the vaccination program, and therefore, just to add to that, that means also that the restrictions has been, you know, worse in the UK as a result of these things. And then everybody can understand it's not great to be in the travel sector in the UK. And whilst this was also pointed out and identified from the government, and this comes back to my earlier point, there still yet is a dedicated support package to this industry, and that is hard to accept. That is difficult to get your head around why that is the case. So having said that, and then, you know, we'll continue to work with the government to try to get that support. But the rollout of the vaccination program is a tremendous success so far. There's no doubt. If you compare that also to some other countries out there, but also the speed is picking up in other countries. We are seeing that, you know, the rates of how people are being vaccinated now, I think it's between 8 and 10%. As an example, it's far less than in the UK. But remember that those 8 and 10%, and that increases every day, that goes to people who are the most vulnerable. It goes to the people who are the most exposed. And of course, the issue is here to make sure that the capacity in the hospitals are such that one can manage the situation. So I think that, you know, once you can see that the vaccination, you know, allows the health systems to cope with the environment, and the most exposed and vulnerable are protected, well, then I think you got to have a reasonable debate about the fact that, you know, are you going to live with the fact that, you know, yes, people can get COVID, but they are highly unlikely to need to go to the hospital because they're not part of the people that have underlying health conditions, or they are at a younger age, as an example. Well, then you probably need to get back to some type of normality, because the damage of the lockdowns and the restrictions, and I mentioned some of those damages, are far worse. Yeah. So I think that, you know, I think the other European countries are you know, picking up speed also on the vaccination programs, but the death rate and the economic toll, you know, are very different, and one has to, you know, recognize that. Also, it's true that other countries, many other countries, has invested a lot more into this industry. That's a fact. It's not a matter of opinion. That is a fact. So, you know, there are reasons to you know, be mindful about these things and bring that to the attention to the government, which we do. And ultimately, we will hope that there will be a package and there will come some specified and dedicated support to the sector, because I think we ultimately need it. It's been illegal to buy the product and services of of people in this industry. And that's not the case in other countries, as an example, to the same extent at all.
Okay. I know you're confident about the return and the consumer confidence to travel and so on. What are your expectations on the industry capacity and pricing when we restart? Because some people are warning of higher prices. I heard Carsten Spohr yesterday say there'll be much more discipline in the market, but I've heard Michael O'Leary this week talking about dumping fares.
Well, I think, first of all, I don't think that there's a lot of historical evidence that Carson will be right on that. I think that the pricing in this market is very dynamic, has always been very dynamic. Absolutely, if you look at this from a logical point of view, the amount of debt that companies has taken on, that needs to be repaid, and that should be reflected in the pricing. More focus on returns rather than market share, as an example. But at the same time, there will be people, and we are not excluded from that. And I think everybody would also like to see that there are opportunities that can come one's way, and one needs to be financially solid in order to take those opportunities when they come, and not do it in a reckless way. But I think that there will continue to be a very dynamic pricing scenario. I think there are going to be a lot of deals going forward that the customers can do. But let's wait and see what will happen for the summer. There's a lot of capacity available out there, but there's also a huge pent-up demand that is there. So you could see a market, a late market that becomes very tight, as an example. But you could also see a market that, if you're getting positive news here from the roadmap, and you're setting yourself up for a slightly larger volume, and then there is an uncertainty with the vaccination, or there's a different mutation or a strain that comes into play, and that means that those targeted measures and restrictions being introduced in more than one jurisdictions, that might have then an impact. So this is a tricky one to call. But and nobody knows. But I think the key thing is that flexibility. The key thing is to make sure the customers are aware about the cancellation policies that one has in place, and that's been the focus for ourselves.
Okay, you spoke recently about easyJet holidays and said that the timing of the launch, which was just before the pandemic, was phenomenally good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to explain?
Still is. No, but no. I mean, look. First of all, I mean, it's partly down to the competitive environment that looks very different than it did, 3-4 years ago. Thomas Cook is not around, and there's a number of other players, also tour operators that has gone out of business in Europe. And we always wanted to make sure that easyJet Holidays could scale up and being introduced into other markets, which is still the plan to do so. Here's the thing: easyJet flies to more leisure destinations than any other European airline. That's the thing. That when you're looking at how people trust the brand, how people view it from a terms of value for money point of view, we are superior in most of the markets where we are operating. All those things plays into the fact that this is an obvious choice if you want to go on holiday and also book a fantastic hotels, and not only the flight. And also with Gary and the team, we have some of the best expertise in Europe in this area. So the fact that we can come out and have a really, really cost-efficient organization, take no risk on the hotel inventory that we don't need to do because of the scale that we have. And also the fact that destinations and hotels are absolutely doing everything they can now to get business going as soon as possible. And we have the distribution. The website is one of the most visited travel websites in Europe. So we have the distribution, we have the assets, we have the network, and we have the competence. This is a great opportunity to build upon what is already a fantastic company, and that's what we're going to do. Okay,
so where would you see easyJet Holidays in 2-3 years?
I think it's one of the leading players in Europe on holidays, because there aren't very many pan-European ones. You got TUI, and I don't know which one else you would put into that category.
Okay.
So. We have the ability to roll that out in other jurisdictions and other markets, and that's what we intend to do.
Okay. Final question, Johan. There's all sorts of things I haven't asked you about. I haven't asked you about corporate travel, but I know you're convinced corporate travel is going to come back and so on. So sustainability, I know sustainability, climate change is important to you. It really requires more time to discuss, but just this, has the pandemic proved a distraction from tackling the decarbonisation of the sector and so on, or do you see it proving an accelerant?
Yeah, actually, yes and no. I've seen that there have been some companies who has, moved away from the commitments that they've done on the environment and the actions they've been taking for reasons of that has to do with cash and privatization. We haven't done that, as you understand, as you know, we're still one of the only major airlines in the world who's offsetting the carbon emissions from all the fuel we're using. And it's for us, it's a way of operating. That's the way it's the right thing to do. So we don't see it as something else that is part of how we do things. And it's there as a bridge before we get on to more exciting technologies such as hydrogen and electric in our case, as an example. But to the other point, to say why it hasn't slowed down, 2020 was actually quite an exciting year from a technological point of view. When you look at the developments that are taking place from a battery point of view, the new sulfur generation batteries now is proven to be tremendously promising, as an example. So you could see that in 2030, in theory, with those capacities of batteries and with the weight that they will have at that point in time, that they could provide, as energy source for a 180-seater aircraft, as an example, who flies into most of the network that we do today. Hydrogen, as an example. So there's many things that's been happening that is really exciting from a technical point of view. Now, there's one thing that's going to be different coming out of this pandemic, and that is people are going to look at sustainability much more careful. They're going to make choices depending on how they view their company and their product and the services and the impact they have on the environment. So I think it's a given that this is going to get much more attention going forward. And what we want to do and what we are debating and what I'm engaging with decision makers around that is to make sure that there's funds available that can go into the development of this. Because one of the problems is, of course, that funds has been removed. The industry hasn't had any revenue here for hardly a year almost, and those resources would have needed to be in place in order to invest into these technologies. So that's what we're speaking to governments to make sure that they are. And I think that there's a big appetite to do that. But then also there's all sorts of things, and you're right. We could take another webcast to talk just about this, because I think that there's a lot of uninformed opinions out there. I think that there's an over-reliance for instance, on the idea on sustainable aviation fuels, as an example, for short haul. There are much more exciting, better prospects from the environment point of view to go into with renewable energy, something that is working on hydrogen and electric, as an example. Sustainable aviation fuels is primarily an offsetting mechanism, because it produces the similar qualities and characteristics as kerosene when it's in use. It's the manufacturing process that clearly works as a sink tank from carbon, just like any other high quality carbon offset projects that you have. So, and the whole idea now that I'm hearing some people think that, well, we should mandate some sustainable aviation fuels on short haul, but not in long haul. That's just simply wrong. Long haul accounts for a larger share of the carbon emissions that aviation produces, as an example. So there are many things in this area that we need to make sure that we're absolutely engaging on, because otherwise there will be the decisions being taken that are not in the best interest of the sustainability and the issues around that.
Okay, so Johan, please come back and talk to us separately about these issues you've just touched on, so we can explore them more fully. But on the basic point, the additional debts that everyone's taken on because of the pandemic need not preclude investment in sustainability, but it needs government support.
Yes, it absolutely needs government support. And here's the thing, Ian. This is and will be a massive industry in itself. Europe, UK can take a lead in this industry. This will be, just look at cars. as an example, where basically every car manufacturer now starting to come up with dates where the whole fleet and their older models will be electric. This is a massive industry. How you take that and put that into the context of aviation, and what that means in terms of manufacturing of engines and airframes and all of that. So why would you not invest into something that is going to be the future? It's going to happen. When I joined and when I got myself into this from an easyJet point of view, when I was talking about some of these things, a lot of people didn't believe it was never going to happen. They didn't believe in electric, didn't believe in hydrogen. And that was only a couple of years ago. Now everybody can see that actually, okay, it will take place. It will happen. Now it's a matter about whether it will be 2030 or 2035. Well, great, good. If that is a couple of years here and there, that's not the issue. But it needs investment and it needs support. And I think from an industry in its own right, it's a fantastic opportunity for any government to take a lead here.
Good. Johan, we're out of time. We have to stop, but thank you so much for giving up your time this morning.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you.